Let's start off by answering the question, what is a stakeholder? In regard to project activities, stakeholders are individuals, groups, or entities within an organization or outside an organization that have a vested interest in the activities and the outcomes of a project. A stakeholder can assume an active role or a passive role within a project and may have either a positive or negative influence on a project's completion. Stakeholders may also arise from organizations that, again, would or could have an interest in a project. A few good examples of an organizational stakeholder would be a trade union, a shareholder, competition and social or political action groups. Examples of project stakeholders are the customer, sponsor, project manager, project team, business analysts, line managers, testers, user groups, and senior managers. Stakeholders play a critical part in the development of requirements for a project. They provide the initial view of what is expected, and the analysis of stakeholders and the development of a stakeholder register enable the project team to begin activities that will help determine the actual deliverables or requirements of a project. The interesting dichotomy of a stakeholder is that their expectations may differ from their requirements, and therein lay the need for project managers to understand the influencing capabilities of each and every stakeholder and ensure that their wants relative to the project's outcome weigh equally when compared to what they really need. An ironic and sometimes comical story about stakeholder comes from a project manager who was about to hand off a finished project and is very proud of the team's accomplishment. While closing out the project, he can't help but notice a level of disappointment coming from the sponsor. The project manager indicates that he has completed all tasks exactly as the sponsor wanted. In reply, the sponsor says, "It's exactly what I wanted, but it's not what I need." The lesson here is not to take the sponsor's requirements as the exact level of detail for project deliverables, regardless of their position or ability to influence. The initial view or voice of the customer should be reflected within the project charter and understand to be a high-level view of the project requirements that will eventually be decomposed to arrive at functional and non-functional business requirements. Those requirements will be used to develop specific project deliverables. Additionally, when analyzing stakeholders, there can be a focus on the role the stakeholder plays. Are they influential in their decision-making process? Do they play a passive role in developing project deliverables? Do they have the ability to make or break a project? It is important for the project manager to be aware of the position a stakeholder has as it pertains to the project, and then to be able to manage that relationship to achieve the goals and objectives of the project. Corporate culture is another important aspect that the project manager needs to understand in relation to stakeholders. Harvard Business School professor John Kotter has written articles relevant to leadership, corporate culture, and change. In an article written for CIO Insight magazine, Kotter describes how corporate culture can drive projects to either positive or negative results. He shares that project teams are often assigned tasks that are beyond their capabilities to accomplish. Those in powerful positions often do not understand the requirements involved and maintain vaulted expectations, which leads to frustration on the part of the team members. This can be a detriment to the project in the end. He also states that in many cases, the team members can't see the big picture and therefore haven't bought into it. This perspective on corporate culture illustrates a very real set of circumstances that can drive a project straight into the ground. In order for a project to be successful, the project manager needs to ascertain from the stakeholders their vision of the outcome of the project. From there, they need to transform that vision into a tangible result. For large-scale, sometimes tedious projects, having this type of transformation can generate the energy necessary to drive the project. The daunting task over time is maintaining momentum and keeping the vision alive. In order to acquire perspectives on project expectations, stakeholder analysis is used as a tool to gain insight that will drive project requirements. Let's take a few minutes and delve into stakeholder analysis. Consider all the individuals within the organization that are impacted by a proposed project. Think about those with influence over the project or those that have a stake in its success. For example, let's use a project to redesign a web page. Real estate or space on a web page comes at a premium, and components of the page represent work that various business entities would have a vested interest in developing, and thereby a stake in the overall project. So for each component of the web page, there could be a set of stakeholders that can impact the success or failure of the project. Organizational charts can serve as an aid to assist in identifying influential stakeholders, or at least serve to ensure that no potential stakeholder is overlooked or omitted. However, they have limited ability in determining the degree of influence a stakeholder may have, other than their position within the organization. Now, obviously, a CEO or senior manager will have substantial leverage over a line manager. But when it comes to subject matter expertise or financial sponsorship, each stakeholder needs to be analyzed in regard to their respective role in the project. Stakeholder interviews can also assist in determining the level of influence and perspective of project outcomes. However, multiple stakeholder interviews may generate more confusion than clarity, as individual bias or conflicting perspectives can be a product of the interview process. Interviews can also lead you to additional stakeholders that may not have been part of the original project plan. It is important to try and gain an unbiased perspective when performing stakeholder analysis. Oftentimes, personal bias or party line perspectives tend to drive a project toward a predefined set of objectives. Once stakeholder interviews are completed, you can arrange your findings into groups. High influence, high interest. Stakeholders that can influence the project and have a vested interest in the successful outcome. The perspective of these stakeholders is important and should be weighed in comparison to all other stakeholders. Low influence, high interest. Stakeholders that have a lot of interest but may not have the ability to influence. This group can be valuable sources of information and help identify organizational challenges. High influence, low interest. Stakeholders with high influence but low interest need to be convinced of the benefits of the project. Low influence, low interest. This group isn't interested in the project and may not be in a position to influence the outcome of a project. The project manager needs to optimize the impacts of stakeholders and should realize that interest can have more of an impact than influence. High interest, low influence stakeholders provide required details in support of the business case for a project. Low interest, high influence stakeholders simply need to be convinced. The success or failure of a project is highly dependent on the actions of people who want the project to succeed. Stakeholder interviews should be conducted until you reach a point where the information you gain does not provide additional insight that is considered to be of value. The benefit of stakeholder interviews is accomplished simply by performing the task to clarify expectations and promote a level of awareness that makes the stakeholder feel as if their perspective is important to the outcome of the project. They are then endeared to the project and considered to have skin in the game. Eventually, stakeholder analysis provides the project manager a greater appreciation for the corporate culture, team dynamics, and challenges that the intended users may face. Keep in mind that negative perspectives pertaining to a project will not diminish simply because you interviewed the stakeholder. The project manager needs to address negative perceptions or even objections to a project directly and take from that interaction either a changed perspective or apply their ability to mitigate concerns. If objections are not addressed, they can jeopardize the success of the project. One option could be to incorporate objections to a project into parts of the design process that mitigates the concern. From lemons come lemonade. The project manager should work to turn negative components or perspectives into opportunities. Negative perceptions or impacts should be considered for redesign to afford a positive outcome. For example, turn potential costs into revenue-generating opportunities. Here are some of the costs of and potential problems with conducting stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder analysis is time-consuming and requires coordinating efforts with all potential stakeholders. Individual bias can be incorporated into interview results. Multiple interviews can provide for misleading or inaccurate results. Here are some of the benefits of conducting stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder involvement promotes awareness and engagement. Business goals are clarified. Stakeholders contribute and collaborate on deliverables. Stakeholder analysis is critical to project development. It permits the project team to compile a stakeholder register, which in turn contributes to the project plan and requirement development. A good project manager takes the feedback from stakeholders seriously and applies findings from that analysis into the development activities of the project. A project manager's key responsibility in regard to stakeholders is to ensure that each stakeholder participates within their role to contribute to the final outcome of the project. The sponsor should work to ensure that all details that justify the initiative are fully vetted and that financial backing is in place to drive the initiative. Users, business analysts, and those that will benefit by the delivery of the project's product should engage in support of project development activities. The project team should be engaged to consider alternatives and innovative opportunities that require thinking outside the box. And senior management should be engaged to a level of N equals buy-in once they recognize the benefits and the overall alignment of the culture, strategy, and mission of the organization.